The rejection email arrived at 6:14 in the morning, just as the sun was beginning to spill golden light across the cracked windshield of Elias Mercer's old freight truck. His 8-year-old daughter was asleep beside him, curled beneath a faded blanket in the sleeper cab, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one missing eye. Elias stared at the glowing phone screen with exhausted eyes while rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the truck stop roof outside. 7 applications. 7 meetings. 7 promises that someone would call him back. And now, for the 7th time, the most powerful trucking CEO in the state had rejected him again. But what neither of them knew that morning was this: within 1 year, the same woman who dismissed him 7 times would stand in the middle of her collapsing company and realize the only thing keeping her business alive was the fleet owned by the single father she once ignored. Before we begin this emotional journey, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Wisdom Story House, if you believe kindness and second chances can change lives. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people the world overlooks become the very people who save it. The city of Fairmont woke slowly under pale blue skies as delivery trucks rolled through industrial streets and workers poured coffee into paper cups before long shifts. Elias Mercer had spent nearly 15 years driving cargo across highways most people only saw on maps. He knew the sound of tires humming on wet pavement better than he knew music. He knew the loneliness of midnight roads, the ache of sleeping in parking lots, and the fear of wondering whether the next paycheck would cover rent. But above all else, he knew what it meant to keep going when nobody cared whether you survived or not. 3 years earlier, his wife Nora had died suddenly after a severe illness that emptied their savings and shattered their quiet life. Overnight, Elias became both father and mother to his little daughter Ivy. Every morning started before sunrise. He braided Ivy's hair using tutorials he secretly watched on his phone. He packed school lunches while checking fuel prices. He drove overnight routes while helping with homework over video calls from rest stops. There were days when exhaustion blurred his vision, but he never let Ivy see how close he was to breaking. What Elias wanted more than anything was stability. He dreamed of building his own small freight company so he could stop disappearing for weeks at a time. He wanted to be present at school plays and birthday mornings instead of calling from highways hundreds of miles away. When he heard that Titan Crest Logistics was expanding its regional contracts, he saw an opportunity that could finally change everything. Titan Crest Logistics was led by Celeste Warren, one of the youngest female CEOs in the transportation industry. Her name appeared in magazines beside headlines about innovation and ruthless business instincts. She wore tailored suits, traveled with assistants, and commanded billion-dollar contracts from glass offices overlooking the city skyline. To most people, Celeste represented success built through discipline and intelligence. But behind the polished interviews and confident speeches was a woman carrying invisible scars of her own. Celeste had inherited the company from her father after spending years trying to prove she deserved it. Executives twice her age constantly questioned her leadership. Competitors waited for her to fail. Every mistake became a headline. Over time, she built emotional walls so high that compassion started looking like weakness. She trusted numbers more than people. Efficiency more than loyalty. Risk assessments more than instinct. And Elias Mercer looked like a risk. The first rejection came after a short interview where Celeste barely glanced at his proposal for a 5-truck independent fleet partnership. The second came through her assistant. The third after she claimed his operation was too small for scalability. The fourth because his trucks were older models. The fifth because his company lacked corporate investors. The sixth because another contractor offered cheaper rates. The seventh rejection hurt the most because Elias had brought Ivy with him that day. She had sat quietly in the lobby coloring on scrap paper while Elias waited nearly 2 hours for the meeting. Through the office glass, Celeste noticed the little girl swinging her legs nervously and the father trying to smooth wrinkles from his only dress shirt before entering the conference room. But instead of empathy, she felt irritation. To her, bringing a child into a business setting showed desperation. When Elias finally walked out of the building carrying his folder of rejected documents, Ivy looked up with hopeful eyes that slowly dimmed when she saw his face. The elevator ride down was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Outside, downtown traffic roared under bright afternoon sunlight while Elias crouched beside his daughter on the sidewalk. He forced a smile and promised her everything would be okay. But when Ivy hugged him tightly and whispered that she believed in him anyway, something inside him nearly collapsed. That night, he sat alone in the cab of his truck after Ivy fell asleep and considered giving up entirely. But survival has a strange way of demanding courage from exhausted people. Instead of quitting, Elias took the last of his savings and bought 2 damaged trucks from a bankrupt carrier auction. He repaired engines himself under brutal summer heat while Ivy handed him tools and wiped grease from his face with paper towels. They spent weekends cleaning rusted trailers together. Slowly, painfully, his tiny fleet grew from 1 truck to 3, then 5. The work nearly destroyed him. There were months when he survived on gas station sandwiches so Ivy could have proper meals. Winter nights froze the pipes in his small rented garage. One driver quit unexpectedly. Another truck broke down crossing state lines. Bills stacked on kitchen counters like threats. Yet somehow Elias kept moving forward because his daughter watched him with absolute faith. And children who believe in you can become stronger than failure itself. Meanwhile, Titan Crest Logistics began facing problems no one saw coming. A massive supply chain disruption swept across regional freight routes after several major carriers collapsed under debt. Delays piled up. Drivers abandoned contracts. Warehouses overflowed with stranded cargo. Titan Crest's reputation began crumbling as delivery deadlines failed one after another. Investors grew nervous. Clients threatened lawsuits. For the first time in her career, Celeste Warren looked genuinely afraid. Then came the storm that nearly ended everything. A violent spring cyclone ripped through interstate shipping routes, flooding roads and disabling dozens of corporate freight vehicles across 3 states. Titan Crest lost nearly 40% of its operating capacity within 72 hours. Emergency contracts worth millions hung by a thread. News outlets started reporting on the company's possible collapse. Inside her office one gray morning, Celeste stared at spreadsheets filled with losses while executives argued around her. Every solution failed. Every backup contractor was overloaded. Then her operations manager quietly placed a file on the table. Only one independent fleet in the region still has functioning routes through the Western Corridor, he said carefully. Celeste looked down at the name and froze. Mercer Freight Lines. For several seconds, the room fell completely silent. Elias was standing beside one of his trucks at a roadside diner when the phone call came. Sunlight stretched across the highway while birds circled telephone wires overhead. Ivy sat inside eating pancakes before school. When he heard who was calling, his expression hardened immediately. The woman on the other end spoke professionally at first, but underneath the rehearsed confidence he heard desperation trembling in her voice. Titan Crest needed emergency hauling support immediately. They were willing to pay triple standard rates. Elias closed his eyes. He remembered every rejection letter. Every humiliating meeting. Every night he doubted himself because someone powerful decided he wasn't good enough. For a long moment, he considered saying no. Then he looked through the diner window and saw Ivy laughing at something the waitress said. Her joy softened the bitterness inside him. Elias accepted the contract. What followed over the next several months changed both their lives forever. His fleet worked around the clock restoring delayed routes while larger companies failed under pressure. Elias personally drove overnight shipments through dangerous weather conditions. His drivers respected him because he never asked them to do work he wouldn't do himself. Slowly, Titan Crest stabilized. Investors regained confidence. Clients renewed contracts. And for the first time, Celeste Warren truly saw the man she had dismissed 7 times. She saw him arrive exhausted after 14-hour drives yet still call his daughter before every delivery. She saw him help stranded drivers on highways even when competitors ignored them. She saw mechanics greet him like family because he treated workers with dignity instead of superiority. She saw Ivy waiting after school beside loading docks with homework spread across shipping crates while her father finished paperwork. One afternoon, Celeste visited a distribution center unannounced and found Elias kneeling beside a young employee whose mother had been hospitalized. Instead of barking orders about delayed schedules, he quietly handed the man cash from his own wallet and told him family mattered more than freight deadlines. That moment haunted her. Because somewhere along the way, Celeste had forgotten how to see people as human beings instead of productivity charts. Weeks later, she visited Elias's garage headquarters during daylight hours. The place was modest, noisy, and imperfect. Drivers laughed while repairing equipment. Coffee brewed in stained pots. Ivy sat at a folding table drawing pictures of trucks with bright crayons. Celeste stood there silently realizing something painful. This struggling single father had built the kind of loyalty and humanity her billion-dollar company lacked entirely. As summer arrived, Titan Crest officially announced a long-term partnership with Mercer Freight Lines. News spread quickly across the industry. Reporters praised Elias as the independent operator who saved a corporate giant during crisis. But public attention never changed him. He still drove routes when needed. Still packed Ivy's lunches. Still carried grief quietly behind tired eyes. One evening after a successful contract celebration, Celeste found Elias alone outside the warehouse watching the sunset burn orange across rows of parked trailers. For once, there were no assistants, no executives, no polished speeches. Only honesty. She admitted she had judged him unfairly from the beginning. She confessed that fear and pressure had made her cold. And though she never expected forgiveness, she wanted him to know she regretted every rejection. Elias listened quietly while warm wind carried dust across the pavement. Then he told her something she would never forget. He said the hardest part of being poor wasn't the hunger or exhaustion. It was how invisible people became once they stopped looking successful. He said every rejection had hurt because he wasn't fighting only for himself. He was fighting for a little girl who already lost one parent and deserved a future that felt safe. Celeste's eyes filled with tears she had hidden from the world for years. Because for the first time in a very long time, someone spoke to her without fear, money, or ambition standing between them. The partnership transformed both companies. Elias expanded his fleet responsibly while ensuring drivers received fair treatment and proper rest. Titan Crest adopted new worker-centered policies inspired by Mercer Freight Lines. Employee turnover dropped dramatically. Morale improved. The culture slowly changed from ruthless efficiency into something more human. But the greatest transformation happened quietly inside two wounded people who learned humility from one another. On the first day of autumn, Ivy stood beside her father at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new logistics center jointly operated by both companies. Bright sunlight reflected from polished trucks lined across the massive lot. Cameras flashed while workers applauded. And there, beside the stage, stood Celeste Warren watching a little girl proudly hold her father's hand. The same father she once rejected 7 times. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Stories like these remind us that kindness, resilience, and second chances still matter in this world. And before the story ends, comment below, never underestimate a good heart. Because sometimes the people society overlooks are carrying the strength that holds entire worlds together. Late that evening, after the crowds disappeared and the celebration ended, Elias drove home beneath golden sunset skies with Ivy asleep peacefully in the passenger seat. The road stretched endlessly ahead, glowing softly in the fading light. For the first time in years, he no longer feared tomorrow. Not because life had become perfect, but because perseverance had finally been seen. And somewhere behind the towering buildings of Fairmont, a powerful CEO sat alone in her office staring at the city lights, understanding at last that success without compassion is one of the loneliest failures a person can live through. Sometimes life does not reward the loudest voices or the richest people first. Sometimes it waits quietly for the exhausted father repairing broken trucks in silence while teaching his daughter how to keep believing anyway. And in the end, that kind of strength becomes impossible to ignore.